We are recording. Good morning. Good morning. Career Talks with the CRC. How are you doing, Cassie?
Girl, I am excited.
Yes. How about you, Jimmy?
I'm doing great. Really excited about this too.
Okay, nice. So before we get started, we're going to do the dreams activity. So we're going to discuss maybe some career interests that you had when you were younger and then how you ended up where you are now. So going into it. Hold on. Oh, no. Wrong one.
That probably is the right one.
Let's see.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so starting off, when you were 5 years old, what was your dream career?
You go first.
Okay,
Jimmy.
I'll go first. You know, I grew up in a really artsy, naturey kind of an environment. I wouldn't say lived out in the country, but we lived kind of out of the city limits. Had a big yard. My parents are really naturey. We always had a garden. My dad's an avid bird watcher and all that kind of stuff. So I had one of those great childhoods where, and it was back in the time too, where it was kind of go explore and then come home when the street lights come on, that kind of thing. So spent a lot of time out in the yard collecting bugs and critters and all that kind of stuff. And my mom was a science teacher, so there was always a lesson involved. But also just really leaned creatively. So I would say when I was 5, and I still remember this in kindergarten, what do you want to be when you grow up? I had to draw that picture. And I'm pretty sure maybe it was my kindergarten one, I think was a veterinarian, but my first grade one was I wanted to be an artist, and I drew a picture of someone painting a painting, right? So have always leaned that way. And then again, through school and through college and all that, everything that I was interested in, anytime I went to the middle school counselor to career plan, they would say, well, if you do this for a career, you can only make like $25,000 a year. And I think that was kind of a deal breaker. So as my parents had always kind of preached, you can have avocations and interests, but you got to make a living too. So anyway, it was between being an artist or some kind of a nature scientist of some kind. I used to love just collecting and observing animals. So that was really my early childhood ambitions.
Nice. How about you, Cassie?
Okay, so I'm trying to think at 5. I know I was a rowdy, rambunctious kindergartner probably. But I first remember thinking I had family that being outdoors, kind of like Jimmy had said, was like really, kind of a big part of our lives. And so, but we also were around water all the time. So whether it was a pool, a lake, the ocean, I just remember constantly being around the water. And I remember it was probably like 7 years old. So I'm gonna say 7. But I remember we took a trip at school to Disney World. I messed that up. It's not Disney World, it's SeaWorld. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, how cool would it be to work with dolphins, work with the whales, work with the sea lions. So my first introduction to marine biology, I was like, that's it. I want to be by the water. I want to be this scientist that studies and helps these, sea creatures and things like that. And actually, I held that career path for like a really long time. I really thought that that's what I was going to do, probably till I was like close into my teens, I would imagine. But yeah, I would say, I totally saw myself in the water, at the water, engaging with all the creatures that live and came from the water. And so, I really, really thought that I was going to go work at the SeaWorlds across the country or the world, and that I was going to help, basically the sea life. And the conservation piece was a big thing for me. And I also do remember eating as a child and going to SeaWorld, like I understood why they were there for the conservation efforts, but it also hurt my heart to think that they weren't actually out in the ocean anymore. Yeah. And so I remember even as a child feeling like, I don't like this, I don't like this part. And so, so as I grew older, obviously, understood the conservation efforts more, but still, even to this day, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like that these creatures who typically have had generations, millions, thousands of years of historically just being out in the open seas that, so much that we can't even understand. And now they're, confined to like a really small space in comparison.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was me. I was going to go be Mrs. Mermaid Keeper.
I'm honestly, that's how I feel now when I go to zoos. I'm just like, I'm a little sad now. It's different than when you're a kid.
Yes.
Going, especially as your mind like starts to like gain perspective, and you're just kind of like, oh man, this actually isn't right.
Yeah. Like, and you get the components, right? Like, I get that, like, it's species that are endangered, and we have to do this for their continual opportunity to sustain. But also, just like some of the general animals that aren't necessarily, but they're there for entertainment.
Yeah.
And like, that's the part where I just cannot get on board.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? So I get it, but also.
Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
Okay, so what was your dream career at the age of maybe like 16 or 17?
To be honest, get rich quick and retire. No,
Preach.
that's everyone's dream. And as I progressed through high school, my parents still kind of pushed me the science route, but they both had basically scientific careers. So always the kid that was in the science fair and all that kind of stuff, mainly because my mom was a high school science teacher. And I think to some degree I had an interest, but quite honestly, even though I think that's when my career ambition was kind of like, okay, what am I going to do that's going to be stable and make good money? And it was like it is still now. It's a good, solid career that can be lucrative and stable. I kind of checked all those boxes, but really, truly, I think in terms of what really gave me joy in the classroom was I still really enjoyed art. I was, because of the way scheduling worked and all that, I was only able to take a couple of art classes. But that was really one of the few classes where I really felt like the teacher really saw my, I guess, for lack of a better term, my potential and really encouraged me and said, you really need to keep taking these courses. I think you'd be really good at this. But again, from a practical standpoint, I think if I were to put pen to paper at the time, I would have probably said graphic artist or graphic designer, something like that. I also took a drafting class, I think, when I was a senior. And, of course, that's more mechanical drawing, but really kind of enjoyed I just have a very spatial way of that is spatial with an A, not an E, not special, spatial way of looking at things. I have that right-brained kind of thing, so I can really picture things well.
Yeah.
So that I would say that was probably what I was most interested in at that age.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess that's leading into my final question, which is, how did you end up in higher education, right?
Oh.
So after going through college as we get older, we have our childhood dreams. And then as we get until we're teenagers and we're like, oh, we have to figure it out now, because now you're going out to college or people are joining the military or whatever they decide to do. And then life is completely different from what you think that you want when you're in like young adolescence or when you're a child. So how did you end up in higher education? How did you end up in the Career Center?
So I'm going to answer the last part of that question.
Okay.
So at 16, I remember that I wanted to be some high-level exec living in New York.
Yeah.
Living in the high-rise, like doing all the things, like super important lady, right? Like boss lady. And I think I still have that, but just not in New York because cost, right?
Oh my goodness.
But also, it was a tie, and I remember very distinctly having two of my very best friends in high school, us actually like having a discussion, envisioning what we imagined our lives looking back like in 10, 15 years at 16, 17. And the other one that I still feel, like you said, in another life, I feel like I would have done, like I would be in Hollywood being like a makeup artist or like a designer, like something like that in the art area. Because I do feel like while that's like a lane that I love for myself, I just, again, going back to like, man, you've got to really be really great at this to actually sustain a living or the type of life that I envision for myself financially. And of course, I just came to the conclusion that this has got to be a hobby and not an actual career path. But to your point, how did I get into higher education? It was actually by happenstance. I was as a non-traditional college student, I had a really, life learning experience navigating the college experience. And so I worked full-time in between full-time and part-time while I was attending school full-time or part-time throughout the years. I actually started out at a community college, Tarrant County College here in Fort Worth, and took me 12 years to complete my associate's degree, y'all, from the time I graduated high school, just because, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I didn't really know. And so, I just took my time. I was gaining, valuable skills in banking and finance during that time.
The money.
Yes, girl. The money, right? Let's go back to the money, which is a really great I think I had a really great experience because through that, I'm very thankful that I had the experiences, the skill sets that I gained through my employment in banking and finance. But also, it gave me the opportunity to know what I didn't like, right? And while it was great when we talk about the salary benefits, my actual work-life balance was awful. And I really, I was making all the money, but I was so tired, I didn't have time to spend it, right? And so it's well, great, you're just hoarding all this money to not do anything with, and you're so tired, you're stressed all the time. And honestly, I mean, you all know, I can't fit in a corporate, black and white box. I cannot be made to wear, a certain type of suit every day. That's just not me. And I recognize that if I were going to stay in that environment, it was just not going to be healthy for me long term. And so that's really kind of kicked my butt in gear and was okay, I've got to finish college. I've got to figure this out. So I actually decided that I wanted to be a nurse. Long story short, a very good friend of mine who was already a practicing nurse came to me with a terrible story around child abuse that she saw in the emergency department. And it was actually, I had already been accepted into nursing school before I'd even started. She came and told me that. She was yeah, you're going to see stuff like this. And I was girl, I cannot carry that. I cannot separate that. I cannot come home from work and not bring this home with me. I know myself enough. I cannot do this. So then I shifted gears and I was but I know that I want to do healthcare. I love the idea of healthcare. We all need it, right? And so while completing my bachelor's degree at Tarleton State University, I got a job in the advising office part-time. And I was man, I love this. No, why did nobody tell me working in college was fun? You know what I mean? So anyways, started off as a part-time person in the academic advising and academic affairs office as a student worker. And then they created me a full-time position while I was still finishing my undergrad degree. And then I stayed there and shifted. I was actually pursuing my master's degree in, it's technically management leadership, but I focused in healthcare administration, public and healthcare administration. And I had this idea at the time before I'd really kind of slid into, okay, we're not going to actually do this, but I thought I was going to go be some big wig hospital administrator. I'm going to make all the money. I'm going to make all these decisions. I'm going to be the boss, right? And then again, I realized my actual environment was going to be kind of stuffy. I was ooh, that's not me. And so then I realized, it's you know what? Let me finish this degree and let me figure out how I can stick with the higher ed that I know, but also kind of find that niche area in higher education, healthcare, higher education, and career development. And so, so that's how I started, and then just kind of slowly gained the skill sets, started getting those certifications in career development, moving into specific healthcare advising at Tarrant County College. So all I really worked with there was healthcare-specific allied health students. And so I just really love them. Most of us know that our healthcare students, whether it's at, the associate's level, even undergrad nursing, those types of things, but obviously us being at a predominantly graduate institution, we know that they're high performers, right? We know. So for me, that was kind of my trade-off to be well, I don't necessarily have to be the big boss, but I want to work with people that are very driven, very high performers. And so, which led me to TCC and then eventually here to TCOM. And like I said, during that time, I started acquiring those certifications, doing trainings, going to conferences, and just really recognizing how much I enjoyed the development piece, the personal and professional development aspects of it. And then just really learning like, hey, there is actually a career path in which I actually get to do what I love in the personal and career development space and also working in healthcare. So, Atanas, thank God for that, because honestly, I think if it weren't for my experiences, I don't know that I would have done my own research to figure out that pathway without actually going through it. So that's how I ended up in higher ed, and again, love it. And again, I still have the opportunity now with these undergrad nursing program coming in, our undergrad in biomedical sciences. So now I am getting to still kind of reach back to those populations that I started with, but still continue to work with, our graduate professional level students.
And do it your way too.
Girl,
focusing on what you like, being able to embrace your personality, who you are. I think those are the things that are extremely important, because we feel like we have to fit into these boxes, and then that brings extra stress on you, like mentally. And I don't think you could be like the best worker if you're feeling like, okay, like I can't do this. I have to be this person that I'm not. So I think that's where you're working at, you want to make sure that feels like, okay, you're comfortable, like your team like embraces who you are.
Yeah, and to that point, like even being able to facilitate my own experiences of being able to show up authentically as myself and encouraging our students to do the same. Like it is possible to find employers and places and spaces in which you will be valued for exactly who you are and what you bring to the table. And so it's really empowering for me to have experienced it and then to facilitate that to other students and be like, yeah, no, you're right. Like, yes. Yeah. And so for me, like, that's the fulfillment and the empowerment that I get from what I'm able to do is share my own experience in my own career development and recognizing, no, making the money and being in spaces and places where I'm not valued for my skill sets, my personality, those types of things. I think, and that's one thing I really value about HSC too, just in general as an organization, is that I feel like as an organization we are encouraged, show your fire in our values to really step outside and say, hey, here, I don't have to look and be and feel like everybody else. And while there may be some components to that are similar, I value those unique aspects and qualities. And I'm thankful that I'm in a space in my career and at an organization that encourages that.
I love that. Okay, how about you, Jimmy?
Wow, I don't know if I can top that, but let me see. But interestingly, though, and as Cassie and I have talked before, there are some similarities in our path, actually. I've already talked to you about, just kind of my childhood ambitions and then getting a little bit more serious in high school and starting to think about, the pathway in the corporate world, through some kind of science or engineering or something like that, just because that was the thing to do and kind of where my parents had influenced me. And so when I went off to college, this is kind of I don't know if it's a funny joke, but this is my joke, is that, where I went to school, they had pre-engineering, which means you were a physics major. And so I would tell people I was a physics major until I took physics. And then that changed things. Because, in high school wasn't that difficult. The college level is very, very different. And I thought, I'm glad I kind of discovered that as a freshman. I thought, I don't want to do this for 4 years, much less as a career. It's just my brain just isn't really wired that way. So just because I needed to pick something, and I think I'd always been pretty good at math too, and went to some academic advising and thought, well, I just want to pick something. My strategy was get out in 4 years with something that I can have a career in. I didn't want to do necessarily like liberal arts where I knew I'd have to go to grad school or that I would be doing who knows what, right? I mean, I wanted to at least be able to plug into a corporate environment and then go from there. So I chose accounting, right? Which, from an academic standpoint, never really struggled with, but from day one just thought it was really boring and really dry. Just really didn't have a passion for it. And I finally, it's like we get that, we're going to be a senior in college and now we're making adult decisions, and that wake-up call. And I remember just kind of going through this, I don't know if it was an identity crisis or whatever it was, but I got to my senior year and thought, I don't want to do this. What am I doing? But at that point, I also didn't want to start over and change my major. And I just want to get out of school. And so I went to where I went to school had, the counseling center and career center were kind of all in the same place, and for good reason. But I went up there and said, I want to talk to a counselor. And they said, well, what about? I go, I think I need an aptitude test because that's the only word that I knew. And they said, well, what for? I go, well, I don't know. I'm just not happy with my major. So anyway, set up an appointment and talked to their assigned career counselor who said, I don't think it's aptitude because my grades were good. He said, I don't think it's aptitude. Have you heard about what then was called the Strong Campbell, now the Strong Interest Inventory, which you're all familiar with? And said, let's give that a shot and see if maybe that tells us something. So I went there and took the Strong Campbell. And back in those days, to date myself, they had to mail it off, and then it was scored, and it came back like 2 or 3 weeks later, not this instant, like we get now. So went back in, and he showed me my results, and not to any shock is that accounting was at the bottom of the list in terms of interest.
Wow.
Like in the negative, it was that. He said, "Here's your problem. It's not your capabilities. It's you don't care about it. You don't care about your major. You don't care about the subject matter. But what rose to the top were things like education, counseling. I think architecture was one. I think hairdresser was one.
Yes.
Yeah, which I thought, no, don't do that, and some other stuff. But anyway." Stuff I didn't think about, but then that's when that kind of opened my eyes to, my counselor explain, kind of like we talk about with our students, Holland codes and this and interest and how interest really is what's going to really get you in, I guess help you to become plugged in and successful at whatever you do. And really, honestly, if I look back at my college experience, if you ask me what any of my professors talked about in a class, I couldn't tell you. I didn't sleep through class, but it wasn't so much the academic takeaways of them learning how to study and learning how to meet deadlines, but what I look back on in college and fondness the most was I was an orientation, what we call them orientation counselors, what we call orientation leaders. And for 3 summers, I got to do orientation and just had the greatest time, because I felt like not only was it fun, it was kind of like going to summer camp in a way and hanging out with your college friends and living in the dorm for a few weeks and meeting all the new freshmen and all that. But the fact that I really felt like I was paying forward and getting to meet the students and their parents and talk about the institution and talk about what it means to be a college student, help them getting registered back in the early 90s was a lot more cumbersome than it is today. You don't just – there were no smartphones. You actually had to physically go and fill out a schedule and all this kind of stuff. So it was kind of a challenge. And I thought, man, if you could only get paid for this stuff. And then when I graduated – so I graduated – got my first. I was an oil and gas accountant for a kind of a medium-sized oil and gas company in the suburbs of North Houston. And my roommate at the time, we were friends in undergrad, and so we decided we both lived in the same town. He stayed there too, didn't move away. And he was a radio, television, film major, but he got a job with our recruitment, our admissions department, so was a recruiter.
Yeah.
And even though he would come home every day and just talk about how boring it was, I go, man, tell me more. I was so excited to hear about what he did and how you can work, you can do this, and you can talk to prospective students. You can go and visit and do recruitment events and do this and do that. And so I thought, man, if we could only trade places. Yeah. And so I thought, after a couple of years of doing the accounting thing and just same thing, wasn't getting paid bukus of money, but a good, comfortable living for a 20-something and a good company and a good future. But what I quickly discovered was, even though I made friends and still have friends from that first job, going back 30 years ago, is that I just didn't really share a lot of the same ambitions, the same goals, the same values. It was all about what do I drive, and I got me a new boat and this, and just the things that drove them. And the things that drove me were very different. And I didn't feel like I was going to work, doing anything that I was passionate about or making a difference. There was nothing humanistic about it. There was no helping others, or there's no such thing as creative accounting. There was no creative outlet for that. And I thought, this is just not it. And so anyway, so it was kind of by design. I knew I wanted to get a master's degree in something like counseling or higher ed. So applied for the counseling program at UNT, which to my surprise, I didn't know much about it because I grew up in the Houston area, which was, it's a pretty highly regarded program, and it wasn't that large of a move. I didn't have to move out of state, so I thought, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get a master's in counseling and just kind of see where it goes. And so my intention when I first started, because my only real exposure to it was career counseling, so I thought that's what I want to be, right?
Right.
And so, took all the counseling courses. It was a lot different than I thought it was going to be, because it was training for more psychotherapy and Cassie, like you were saying, dealing with the really hard stuff
The
that really
heavy
is
stuff.
hard is hard not to let go of,
Yeah.
or hard in the moment. And so learn some lessons there, but still maintain kind of that passion for career development. And so my entree into this as a profession, my very first day, I think, of grad school, I said, I need a job. I need to get a job because I just quit my job. I just got married. My wife, who's a teacher, was kind of carrying the load, and we know teachers don't make a lot of money, right? So I got to do something. So I walked into the Trio Center on campus at UNT and said, hi, I'm a new grad student. Do you have anything? And they said, well, as it turns out, our training is today, and it's kind of late for that. But tell you what, go ahead and fill out an application, and we'll get back to you. So I said, okay. And it turns out they had openings for, if you're not familiar with the TRIO program,
Yeah.
but they had a tutoring, it was called Discovery, but it was a tutoring program for students who were disadvantaged or what have you. So as a grad student, instead of making the $5 an hour, I made $5.50 an hour.
Ooh.
So they let me tutor students at that rate. And so that's where I started. And that spring, this was in the fall, that spring, a position came open, an hourly position, $5 an hour, came open for basically a grad assistant in the student activities office. They needed someone to do like leadership programming and do different things. So I applied for that. And honestly, I think what got me that job, I never thought that Greek life would ever come back to help me in any way, but they needed somebody with Greek life experience. And because, I was in Greek life and I had a leadership role on campus where I was and all that, it worked out. And so it went from kind of working somewhat in Greek life to really developing more on the student leadership development space. And I really, really liked it because they just kind of gave me this creative carte blanche. Like, hey, we got orientation come up. Create a program for this or create a program for that. Or they just kind of let me kind of write my own script in a way. And I thought, man, this is great. And then after about a year and a half of that, they said, hey, we're turning this into a full-time position, by the way. And it was when I was graduating, it said apply. And so I kind of got the fast track to take on that role. So it went from hourly to then full-time. And then I won't tell you the whole story, but went from student activities and organizations, which was my first full-time position, to I actually was a director of a disability office for 3 years.
Wow.
That's where the accounting came in because they needed someone who knew how to do budget. So that's where that came in. Then did a stint in academic affairs, and then, long story short, I ended up at Texas Women's University, getting back into the leadership space, but still I felt like I was missing something. So notice I never was in the career development space. Although with leadership, I found a natural connection. So a lot of what I would do with my leadership program at TWU was partner with the Career Center. So we would do leadership development in the space of, how does this manifest itself into your developing your career? And so when this position came open, there was not a career center, there was not a career advisor at the Health Science Center. This was back in 2009, and they actually created a position because they knew they needed career services. And just so happened I knew some folks here, and they said, hey, if you want to apply for this job, we encourage you to do so. It was a one-person, one-desk, one-office shop, and got the position. And so since, for the last 14 years or so, have been able to kind of get a foothold. And really, I thought it was going back and relearning a lot of stuff, So it's been a great journey to really rediscover what I think brought me into higher education to begin with. And then I think that what's great about what we do now, there is some things that obviously we're beholden to certain expectations from the division and the university.
Right.
We kind of get to write our story a little bit. They say kind of go make it happen. And so that's where I feel like we do get to be our own decision makers and get to create and get to think of new things, just like this podcast, right? This was hatched out of a creative idea that
Absolutely.
no one told us we could or couldn't do it. We said, hey, we're going to do this. This is a great idea.
Exactly.
And here we are. So anyway,
Yes.
that's my story.
I love it. Yeah. Going into, I'm trying to think if I introduced myself, but hi, I'm Di. I'm a career consultant. And I think everyone's journey is so unique getting into higher education because mine was very similar. Throughout my entire childhood, I thought I wanted to be track athlete, Olympics, went to college, ran track. And I focused my career decision based off of wanting to work with athletes. And I was like, okay, medicine, wanting to work with athletes, physical therapist, boom. I'm going to be a physical therapist. I'm going to go to Howard and get my degree, and that's going to be my path. Finished my degree, went all the way down to Howard to do an internship. I was like, oh no, I did not like this. And it was mainly because for me personally, I knew that I wanted a job that was different every day. So not every day looked the same. And I honestly had a moment too where it wasn't physics, but it was chemistry, where I was like, oh, you really need these chemistry courses to get into the program. So I just remember my dad being like, Nija, what do you want to do with your life? And I was like, I don't know. I just want to help people. And ended up getting into higher education because when I was an undergrad, I was an RA. I was very involved. I was an RA. I was president of NPHC. I was I'm in a sorority. So I had a lot of experience with higher education, but in different forms as a student. And so then I was like, okay, I'm going to get into admissions. Well, apply for a job in admissions. But mainly same thing. I was really trying to figure it out. I didn't know what I wanted to do. My dad was like, well, get a job first before you decide to go back and get your master's so you can figure out what you want to do, which was the best advice. Work experience is so valuable. And worked in admissions, loved it. And then writing through my master's program, and then I worked in TRIO as well, advising. Wow, okay. Yeah, so loved working with first-generation students. And that first-generation student experience is so unique because you're navigating waters where it's like you don't have anybody to tell you the answer. And then sometimes even students who are first-generation don't even know about the resources that are on campus that are available for them. So that was really unique. And then through writing my thesis, I was like, okay, I want to work in career. Career development is where it's at because so many people, I think you tie your identity to your career,
Absolutely.
you know, your purpose and figuring out, is this what I want to do with my life? And I just think it's extremely important to note that your experience in your career is not a linear one, right? It's going to go in so many different paths and changes, and it's okay to change your mind.
Right.
It's okay to go through working a career, have those experiences, gain those skills, and then be able to add it on to what your next move is going to be. So I guess with concluding that, because we're going to wrap it up, I know the time went by so fast.
Oh, this is great, yeah.
My question to you both is, in your opinion, what are the most critical skills and qualities that students should develop to excel in their future careers?
Rock, paper, scissors.
So many.
I know.
I would say, I would say this is based upon my personal experience, obviously, research that we know is out there. In my experience as a college instructor, I think a lot of that is really, honestly, are those interpersonal skills. For me, I find you can make so many things much easier on yourself and those around you if you understand your communication style, if you are having those conversations about, hey, do you prefer in face or in person? Knowing your conflict style. I think all of these things that require us to self-reflect, right? We know we need all of these technical skills, right? We know we need to learn how to use a technology. We know that we need these other things. But when we talk about communication, we just don't realize, and I say we collectively for those who don't study this stuff and practice in it every single day. When I started to do that and really recognized the impact of our own self-discovery and how we engage in our world and our environment and through those interpersonal skills and relationships, really how beneficial it can be if we're self-aware about it, but how damaging it can be if we're not doing those self-reflections, if we're not taking that feedback that's being provided to us, if we're not asking for feedback, right? I think a lot of us, even for me, it took me a long time to feel comfortable saying, hey, I really want to do better. What's your, what kind of feedback do you have for me on this project or this presentation or, whatever it is. So I think a lot of that really comes back to we can set ourselves up, we can do all the training, we can do all the certifications and do all the things, right? We can do all of those things, but if we aren't taking the time to self-reflect how we can continue to do better, continue to develop and grow in our own understanding of how we engage in our environment and with others and how that actually does really impact not only ourselves, but our experience, right? Whether or not you could have a positive or a negative experience. Being able to recognize those who have highly developed skill sets and say, hey, I want to be like that person when I grow up. Yeah. Or to acknowledge, hey, I need to grow in this area. That was not my best work. I recognize this is a considerable pattern for me. So for me, I think there's tons of skills we can talk about that are really, really important. But I think for me, it's just the ability, and no matter what environment that you find yourself in, whether that's it with the president, with Dr. Sylvia Trent Adams, or if that's with us and our students, I think it's really powerful and impactful for us to really understand the space in which we're operating, and again, just kind of falling back on that social emotional intelligence piece. I think that a lot of today's career issues could really be solved if we all took that to heart a little bit more seriously and were intentional about acknowledging, developing, not only in ourselves, but us that are in leadership positions, right? Like, we can all say that we've been in spaces and places where maybe the leadership itself weren't doing those things. So why would it be important for us to do that, right? So it's kind of like, you don't want the blind leading the blind. You want to see folks in those positions that are intentional about those things, which are encouraging not only, the organization as a whole, but also just really honing in on, like, how can I do better? How can I be better? How can I be a better teammate? How could I explain something better so that maybe an issue that we're finding is coming, into play more often? Like, let's really step back and evaluate, like, what's my role? What's the, what are the bigger picture things that maybe I don't have control over, but what are the things I have control over? And really being intentional about that. And I feel like, for me, that's probably one of my proudest skill sets, is like recognizing that I'm an excellent communicator, but I can always do better and be better. And I can also identify those skills in others and help them see not just their potential, but like what they're doing well right now. And so I think for me, as far as like serving others, wanting to work and help folks, is that for me is just really understanding the impact of, our communication, whether that's verbally, through email, if that's our body language, like the energy, on my door, I have something on my door that says, hey, check your energy before you come in here. Like, and I mean that, like, honestly, I don't want you, like, it's okay if we have to have a tough conversation, but if you're just like coming in, womp, 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 like, like, check yourself and then come back.
Ready, 1, 2.
There we go.
Oh, that's the wrong one again.
We'll get these buttons down one
We'll get
day.
them.
But yeah, all to say, all that to say is, like, I really feel like for me, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Like, it's so important that we're able to communicate and be kind and respectful to one another, and acknowledge our downfalls and continue to develop and grow in those ways. So that's for me.
Absolutely agree. Okay, how about you?
I'm just going to say ditto, but definitely agree with what Cassie said. But yeah, I mean, there's so many things that I think lend themselves to success in a career that are intangible, hard to define, hard to measure, hard to describe. I know the three of us preach this all the time. And one of the things that I always say when we're giving presentations, especially like when interviewing for a job or interacting with an employer, is don't be the smartest kid in the room. Even if you are, don't be the smartest kid in the room. And what I mean by that is there's a certain level of humility and a certain level of making it not all about me. And I think, to me, what that means is let people figure out how brilliant you are. I mean, your piece of paper is going to say a lot of that, and that's kind of one of the unique challenges of being in an environment where our students are high achieving, highly skilled, highly academically accomplished, highly ambitious, that, their academic record really does tell the story. So when an employer comes and wants to know if you're a good fit, okay, that means you're minimally qualified. Great, but who are you as a person? What do you value? How do you carry yourself? How do you treat others, right? And so, facing things with humility, but I think, too, it's always being curious, being a lifelong learner. It doesn't end when you graduate. It really begins. That's why they call it commencement, because you're just beginning to go from being a learner and being in the classroom to applying it in real life. But that doesn't mean that learning ever stops. I mean, to this day, like I've said, I feel like I'm constantly learning new things. And one of my graduate school professors said, she says, the older you get and the more that you know, the more you realize that you don't know.
Yes.
And I feel less informed and more ignorant, I think, now than I did when I was younger, because you don't know any better.
Yeah,
the world's my oyster, and I know everything, and I'm out to go conquer it. But in actuality, we're just scratching the surface. So that means you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to be teachable in order to do that. As I mentioned, being, having that sense of humility, always looking at things from the team perspective. How does this impact others? How does this help the team succeed? Not just me, because at the end of the day, it's us who gets evaluated on our individual performance and how we do. And I want to keep my job because it's my paycheck and it's my expenses. But we have to operate from how the success of the team is going to be. And so I think just operating from that standpoint, always building. I think our values say it worse, say it the best. So I would probably say it worst, but I think our values really capture all that. And I think Cassie alluded to some of those as well. We're always having to. What's our energy? Are we really passionate and showing our fire about what we do? Are we always thinking about others first and serving others? All those things, I think, say it very well. And I think that's why, obviously the HSC is very much a values-driven institution and even hires on a values-based, system, because they realize that a lot of skills can be taught, a lot of on-the-job training you're going to learn over time, but you just can't teach those foundational things. If you don't have them, you don't have them. And you got to bring your attitude, your good attitude every day. So I think ultimately it's your attitude and your outlook. And if it's can do, if it's growth, if it's learning, if it's serving others, if it's what does this do for the team? What can I do for you? How can I work extra hard and how can I be excellent today? That's going to carry anyone far, no matter what you do. So.
Yes, I love that, Jewel. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up our first episode. We're excited. Some of the resources that the CRC offers is mock interviews, resumes. We do personal statements, CVs. We do job exploration. Am I missing anything?
Networking, etiquette dinners, LinkedIn. You name it. I always tell students when I do presentations, I'm just like, think of anything that has anything to do with you getting a job.
Yes.
We can do it.
We do it.
We do it.
We do it. So if you're listening to this, thank you for listening, and catch you on episode 2.
All right.